So we have arrived at the Lviv Children's Hospital, and as is to be expected, the person that we are meeting is currently in surgery. So we have to wait for a bit. We've tried to see if we can do some scouting beforehand, but basically they've said no, we gotta stay put because all the people involved in this are in surgery. So welcome to time delays. So when Dr. Solomia told us that we were going to be meeting our first patient, I was very excited. And then when she mentioned that our first patient was 3 years old, I got a little bit nervous, not gonna lie, because I've worked with young children before and extracting images on a time constraint is quite difficult. But luckily, you know, she was amazing and she was very willing to chat and kind of let us have a conversation for quite a period of time. So we were able to actually get an image from her. And at the beginning she was quite shy, she was in a corner, so I always find it's good to start low with kids and literally go down height-wise and put them in a position of power just visually if you can, so kind of, you know, make yourself physically a safe space for them, if that makes sense. And then kind of start interacting with them and only get close to them as they allow you to. Always ask permission, like before I sat on her bed, I said, can I sit on your bed, is that okay? Get consent, even at such a young age. I think it's really important to make sure that they know that you're respecting their boundaries. But yeah, I'm really excited, nervous about how we're gonna put this all together, but excited. And yeah, I think it went quite well. So we've just come out of a completely different example, which is that sometimes you meet a child and they're quite shy at the beginning, but then suddenly they see some of the other photos, you get chatting and immediately he's like, I want to fly. And then it's about decanting, what does that mean? And we went through a few iterations of that, a spaceship, a plane, a monster truck. We settled on the monster truck, which I think is probably the hardest one for my brain. But he wants to be in space and he wants to go away. And he said he wanted to go away forever, but he's still happy with planet Earth, which I thought was interesting. But yeah, so that was actually quite straightforward. And now it's about putting it all together. So once we've got the concepts down of what we want to do, finding the right place in the hospital is really important. There are a lot of white rooms and I find that to be incredibly sterile, and even though we still want to know that we're in a hospital, we want to bring in that element of magical realism and align with the colors that the children were talking about. So trying to find the right space for that, and that takes a bit of time, but it will also save a lot of time and it will actually dictate, you know, the shade of green or the shade of purple that we end up picking out has to all work with the room that we choose and the space that we choose. So it's a hunt. So the hospital has been incredible with us and basically gave us pretty much free reign to choose locations, and so now we've found the places that we want to shoot in, and now we're going to go collect all the props and all the materials to create the environments that we're going to put together. So yesterday we went and got all the materials. We went to a warehouse, we went to a fabric shop, we went to a flower shop to kind of put together the ideas that the kids had come up with. And so now we've created one of the monsters that the little girl was scared of, and tried our best to do it with a exercise walking machine or running machine. And yeah, we're just building the set now. I found this quite painful, obviously, and I think we all probably do, that, you know, her monster has a lot to do with the war. So obviously she's scared of this monster that has 2 sirens because of the sound of the sirens and her having experienced so much of that. And I think for me it was just really important to get to a point where, rather than her recoiling in fear of this monster, she was able to get to a place where she was okay to be in this image with him and in a way confront him. So she kept saying she wanted to give this monster a letter. We didn't really understand what was in the letter, but whatever it is, I think it's important to her. So sometimes we don't need every single detail, we just need to understand that this is important. And you know, when she was talking about how this monster went and destroyed their home, they've been displaced for a while, I think it's really important to also support her enough to make sure that she's got enough elements to confront this monster visually. So she says she really likes flowers, she likes purple, she likes violet, she wants a magic stick, and she has all of these elements in her imagination that will make it okay visually for her to stand there. The second shoot was pretty chaotic. We were in a hallway that had quite a bit of people moving by, and the reason that we ended up doing a hallway was to get a little bit of depth, to get some of the big windows. As you can see, they're quite beautiful, and some of the rooms were very, very tiny. Some of the bigger rooms had other kids in them, so it wasn't okay to shoot there. So it just kind of made sense, but it did mean that we had to work quite quickly and every so often kind of dismount a lot of things so that people could go by. So in the morning we had students, in the afternoon we had just patients and people, doctors coming through, but I think we managed okay, and I'm just happy that we were able to pull all of this off in such a short period of time. After chatting to the children, I went and did little sketches of what I envisioned each shoot would look like. And one of the most important parts for me is to find the right location for the shoot. And I think that I did that better with the first shoot than I did the second, even though I'm not entirely sure where else I would have put the second, but the first one just worked so well. Basically, I just love the fact that there was that sign kind of at the top of the doors in Cyrillic, and that immediately situates you in a particular place, right? It's not Western Europe, and so visually you're already thinking, okay, where could I be? And then I really like the fact that the walls, they just have this kind of tonality, and the, you know, the pipes exposed and this kind of thing. It just really felt like it was feeding into this environment that's going through something, right? And so creating the monster was the first thing I wanted to get done, because I wanted to understand how this monster was gonna be existing in this environment. And for that we used I think it's like a running machine or a walking machine, I'm not sure what you call it, but it's in the gyms, and they so happened to have one. So that was fantastic because it gave us the height to create this monster. But then I wanted to make sure that the young girl's color kind of extended throughout. Like I wanted some of the roses to kind of trickle onto his side. I wanted some of the flowers to trickle onto the little chair that was on the left-hand side. I wanted the ribbons to kind of, just to allude to the fact that she is almost like breaking through that darkness and her color is expanding through that hallway and she's somehow filling it. Even though she's so tiny in relationship to him, she's actually that powerful that she's actually kind of almost overtaking the room in that sense. We had to get really creative because we didn't have much in terms of resources, so we ended up putting a light stand on a table just to get a little bit more height. So that's not something that I would ideally love to do, but that was what we had to do. And so you get creative, you try to big borrow and steal a little bit. In this case, we had a wonderful hospital staff that basically just gave us carte blanche to say, do whatever you have to do. And whenever we needed help, we just asked for permission, and we really just had that open communication with the medical staff, with our translator, who was phenomenal. She just was incredible. She was basically fixer, translator, a set design assistant, everything. So everyone really multitasked, and I think that kind of team mentality is what makes a shoot successful versus not, if we're able to all pull together for a common goal versus, you know, not being able to make that happen. So we absolutely never would have made that happen without everybody coming together. Even the person shooting this video, Luke, was actually helping out the whole time. So everybody was all hands on deck. So for that, I'm endlessly grateful, because you can only make a good image with a good team and with a good source. So in the end, I think that's important to remember if you're doing conceptual work, is if you're doing it in the way that I'm doing it, I really don't feel like I'm a creator of an image. I'm an interpreter of someone's imagination. Somebody has gifted me their story. I'm taking that and trying my best to create it. And I'm relying on a team of people, you know, sometimes whomever's around, but to really execute that vision. And I think that's so important. What I can say is that I'm absolutely exhausted. And I think from any time that I have covered any kind of conflict environment, when you are doing a frontline, you are so tired. And that's probably one of the most important things to think about, is how are you going to look after yourself? You know, I know that I have an immune system that's quite sensitive sometimes, particularly my lungs. And so I always make sure that I've got my vitamins with me. I bring, you know, certain kinds of things that I know help me out. Sometimes I get a sore back, so I have heat patches that they're really light things, but I just chuck them in my bag in case I need them. So if you have any kind of, you know, situation with your body that you think could be an issue, you have to think ahead for that. And just consider that you're going to have to be running on probably empty most of the time. Sometimes you're in places where you're really cold. Sometimes you're in places where you're very uncomfortable. Right now we have to catch a bus back overnight after having taken an overnight bus, you know, the night before last. And it just is what it is, you know, it is what it is. And it's not ideal, but it is what happens. So I think overall we've done quite well. We've gone in to try to materialize a plan that was quite ambitious, and I think in the end I was just happy that the kids had a good time. Coming into a situation like this for more journalistic purposes, you want to kind of understand the impact that the war has had on the hospital itself. How have they dealt with the influx of kids? You do a little bit of preparation and see, you know, what kinds of statistics, for example, have changed between, you know, before 2014 and maybe before, you know, February 24th last year, to try and understand how the hospital has been coping, and also to try and see how the doctors and the nurses and basically all the medical staff have been coping with this. Also, how are the patients dealing with it? So how are the children dealing with this? How much do they know? How much can they tell is going on? It takes a little bit of time with younger kids also to build trust. So I would have also spent time with them for journalistic purposes, just chatting to them to try and understand, you know, how much information we're actually going to be able to have in this conversation. And spending enough time with kids is really important if you can. Trying to understand what the parents are going through, I think, is also really important, because you know, the parents of the young boy that we were shooting with today in the magical car that had to go through the ring of fire, I mean, for them, it's really tough having to bring their child here because they can't get the medical support that they need in their town, so they have to be back and forth. And on top of that, knowing that they're taking their young child to a place that's, you know, under attack or having, you know, active shelling and things happening every so often, it's just really stressful. And so trying to understand the impact of the war and trying to access those stories is really important. Trying to get different angles, so from the medical staff, the nurse, the parents, the child, and then getting some establishing shots, right? So establishing of the hospital, maybe some of the shots of the hallways, and trying to really kind of paint the picture of what the hospital looks like, but at the same time not trying to be disingenuous about what's actually going on in the city, because I find, you know, a lot of cities in Ukraine that are further west, so not in the actual front line, a lot of them are operating almost as though the war is not here. I mean, obviously it is, and it's really evident that, you know, an air raid alarm could go off anytime, but people are living their lives, people are going to school, you will see a lot of soldiers, you'll see that trickling kind of merging of worlds, you'll see ambulances, military ambulances, soldiers walking around, students going to school in military uniforms. So you can tell that there's that merging, but at the same time, there's people out at restaurants, there's people out dancing at clubs, there's people wanting to have a good time. And sure, there's a curfew, but it's only from midnight to 5, so you can still have a good time. Last time I was in Kiev, there was a curfew that started at 10 p.m. So it was a little bit less, but people were still going out to bars. People are still socializing. I think it's what allows people to cope. People are still trying to have a laugh, you know, to try and use humor as a coping mechanism sometimes. But even today when we were having lunch with some of the nurses, you know, they just said how important it was for soldiers that they had dealt with in the past to just let loose and laugh about things sometimes. And I'm not trying to undermine by any means how serious the situation is and how painful, but I do think that it's important to bring some light to things. And this is also why I really like working with color, even though we are in a country at war. It's important to me to not forget that as humans, we do have that part of us, and I think it's important to keep it alive and to keep the color alive, because just psychologically, it's like planting hope in my mind. So I like to work with color, even in these kinds of situations. So another thing that's really important is networking. So you need to have contacts of editors, of producers. What kinds of stories do you want to do? Do you want to do print? Do you want to do film? Who are the people that are commissioning these kinds of work? Are there any people commissioning this? Are you just going to drop in? Some people drop in and then make contacts. Other people make contacts first and go with something like the BBC or with you know, some kind of organization that can take them there. They're very different styles of working, right? Because with a big organization, sometimes you have a little bit more limited, more protected movement, I would say. Sometimes freelance, you can do whatever you want, but that also comes at a cost because there's a higher risk, right? So which one do you prefer? Going to something like the Frontline Club in London is an excellent way to kind of start learning about people who are doing this in the field, asking them questions, getting to understand, you know, what their life is like, what the challenges are. And eventually, you just have to basically choose a place and go. And I mean, I think there's a way to do this gradually, you know, starting to cover protests. That was my route, and I started covering protests back in 2006 or something, you know, trying to understand what happens when there's tear gas around, what happens when there's rubber bullets around, what happens, and eventually, you know, building up to, okay, you know, this is really happening. You know, what do we do? And I think it was quite useful to me to have that kind of gradual stepping stones to really covering things where, you know, it was quite dangerous. So I think each person will have their own level of risk, their own kind of reasoning for going to conflict. I think that's something very important as well, is asking yourself why you're going to conflict. Why do you want to put yourself at risk, and which war are you fighting? Who are you fighting it for? Not to say not to go, but sometimes we have our own trauma and our own pain that we carry from our families or from experiences in our life that are pushing us in a particular direction, and, you know, trying to get maybe support for that in the form of therapy. I know I have absolutely done a lot of that. It's important just to understand, you know, whether you're just doing this on a whim or you really, really thought about it. Having a therapist, I think, is key. You know, the whole time I've covered conflict, I've had someone that I could call. In fact, I had more than one person that I could call if I needed like psychological support, or if I wanted to just process something, I could do that. And I think safeguarding yourself to make sure that you can have those things is important. I hope you've enjoyed this masterclass. I hope that you've gotten something out of it. But if you do have any questions, or there's anything else that I could help with or chat to you about, please feel free to reach out. You have my contact details on the page, and I look forward to maybe hearing some comments of things that you might have shot. Thanks so much, and go have a great shoot.